Hello, my name is Michaela O'Connor Abrams, founder of Mocha Plus. Welcome to our Collective Conscience series. We created this series for you to bring together great minds from around the world on myriad topics that we hope will expand your mind, will challenge your current beliefs, and give you an opportunity to be inspired with every video. Enjoy.
Good evening and welcome to our 37th Collective Conscience. I'm Shelley Tatum-Kieran, partner at Mocha Plus, and we are so thrilled to have Beth Brown with us this evening. We're in for a really lovely conversation, which is perfectly timed for the week that we are entering and really for our mindset throughout the year. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Michaela.
Thank you so much, Shelley. We are hard to believe at 37 weeks and Thanksgiving week, so we will certainly conclude our evening with a happy Thanksgiving, but thank you so much for joining us on what is probably not a highly traveled week this week for each of you, but nonetheless a really important one. And what better speaker and message this week for Thanksgiving than Beth Brown, the president and CEO of Community Foundation of Sonoma County. We will be exploring everything from, wait a minute, what's a community foundation? What role does it play? How many are there? Give us an idea about it. Shelley and I had talked about what could we do thematically this week that would help everybody understand that, well, we are taking care of ourselves right now in a way that we haven't had to in years past, perhaps, but what does it mean to everybody else? What can we do to lift up everyone else so that each of us and all that are not even on this call, of course, and this Zoom, excuse me, can have a better week and a better year next year. So Beth, thank you very much for joining us. We're really thrilled. And I know when I started letting everybody know that our friends were on this, and Shelley and I then sent out the invitation, people were like, God, this is wonderful. And who doesn't know Sonoma? So for those of you who are in New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts and all over, we promise you, this is also for you. And she'll tell you why. So Beth, thank you.
It's so great being here, and I just appreciate the opportunity and talking to Michaela and Shelley. You know, my husband and I are keeping a list of, we call them positive unintendeds around COVID, and it seems like programs like this, you know, it's not something you would have done without COVID, but it's this gift of what you're putting together here and bringing this community together. So I'm delighted to be here and be part of it.
Thank you. Well, let's start here. Philanthropy, you know, it sometimes is used synonymously with charity, but it really is different. So when we were speaking earlier, you had some really good thoughts about how you might introduce this whole concept of philanthropy to our community.
Sure. Well, I think I like to think about philanthropy. I mean, there's kind of different layers of it, but at its most broad core definition, philanthropy is a love story. The definition of philanthropy means love of humanity. And we do a lot of work at the Community Foundation talking about legacies, you know, working with people about the gifts they'll give after their lifetime. And although that's a really important part of philanthropy, I also like to think about, like, what legacy are we going to give to next year? You know, what legacy are we going to leave to the person in our jobs after us? And how can we do that in a generous way? So when I've been thinking about this time, you know, this year, what will the legacy of this time be? And I've really been inspired in listening to both historians and poets to try to make sense out of this time. And I hope it is a time where our legacy is a time of extreme grief, which it is, met by extreme generosity. And I asked if this is an okay way to begin, but there's a poem that I came across last week that I just think ties these themes together and has better words than I could to describe what I feel like is the time we're in. It's called "The Thing Is" by Ellen Bass. To love life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat, thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weights you down like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief, you think, how can a body withstand this? Then you hold life like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes, and you say, yes, I will take you. I will love you again. And these words to me, I feel like that's what philanthropy is, and that is our opportunity to kind of fall in love again and fall in love even with the challenges that are before us. And every day I see generous people making the choice, even when life seems so challenging and complicated, and the problems seem insurmountable, to go ahead and make one good choice at a time that somehow improves the community, whether you think of your community as your family and everyone right around you, or your community being the place that you live, or a national community, or a global community. So I think those are just some opening words about philanthropy at its broadest.
Wonderful. Well, you had said that you had the poem, but you weren't going to let us know what it was before. We must have a link to that poem, because
Sure.
that is so poignant on so many levels, right? Because I don't know, wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can think of application there to so much, but when we think about what it means to get outside ourselves, right? Which I believe that everybody wants to do good. I really do. My middle name is not Pollyanna. Some of my friends on this Zoom may think that's the case, but I do. I just very much believe that at each person's core, we are good and we want to do good. The truth also is, and this has been studied, so this isn't just opinion, that we feel better. And actually, two of our speakers in the past on Collective Conscious spoke to this, that we actually feel better and our brains give us that positive stimulus when we are giving to others, when we are serving others. So the whole idea that community foundations were able to harness this in a way that was meaningful to so many, and that the impact of all of the investment that people and companies made was almost hard to measure dollar for dollar, right? What is the performance of each dollar? And we talked about that earlier, and you gave Shelley and me a whole new lens through which to see this, because it was like, think about what those impacts are and how many people are impacted by each foundation. So if you'd share with us kind of the fabric of what is Community Foundation of Sonoma County and what that looks like even in California. And I'll just end with, you had said there are 800 community foundations in the world. And that just blew me away, because of course I was thinking, okay, we're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars that are going for good. And I think that all makes us feel just a little bit better. So let's bring it back to Sonoma. And what does that look like at your community foundation?
Sure, just a little bit of context in case not everyone is familiar with community foundations in general. It's a form of philanthropy that was started actually in Cleveland a little over 100 years ago, when the bank trust officers in Cleveland got together and really thought there needed to be a specific kind of organization to steward the charitable aspects of trust. That was different than the other kind of trust work. So was born the first community foundation in Cleveland, and quickly has followed throughout the United States and beyond. And I would say all community foundations share two things. One is love of place, of a particular place. And the other is the notion that philanthropy is stronger when done in partnership than when going it alone. So it is true no matter where you are, and we have something that we can put in the link called the Community Foundation Locator that I can promise you no matter where you are, you have a community foundation that covers your area, and what they share is making impact in the community, usually covering kind of a variety of most issues, from health and human services to arts to the environment, and then sometimes focused areas. And I do have, let me get my paper here, some numbers that I want to share with you. So in California, there's about, the community foundations hold about $16 billion in assets. So there are, I think, 39 significant community foundations in California. In 2018, which is the most recent year, we have all the data. The California Community Foundations gave away $2.8 billion. So this is a significant charitable impact, and it's a really good option for families who have enough philanthropy. I always say some kind of keywords to me is when someone says, I really need to get organized in philanthropy, I need help organizing it. I mean, if you're giving, a gift to the same 5 organizations each year, and you know what those are, you probably don't need that type of support. But if your philanthropy is complicated, and or you can benefit from having the immediate deduction by starting up a fund at a community foundation and giving out your grants over time, that's another good way to partner with us, with any community foundation. So we've been around, oh, sorry, I was going to go in a little bit just specifically.
That's okay, because I bet you're going to go right to where I was going to ask, which was, let's talk about that impact as it regards your foundation and what that looks like in terms of the other charities and groups that really have needed your help so bad, especially this year.
So we're at an interesting time in our kind of 37-year-old life at Community Foundation Sonoma County. Where up until 3 years ago, I would say we were kind of a generalist community foundation, giving to all areas. We had some specific areas of impact related to early childhood education and Latino, now we'd call it Latinx, leadership. But we really pivoted when we had the 2017 wildfires in Sonoma County. At the time, we thought we were starting, like many community foundations do, a fund to respond to that particular disaster. We called our fund the Sonoma County Resilience Fund because we didn't just want it to be for the Sonoma County wildfires, but honestly, I thought we were setting up a mechanism for the next generation, that this would be our once in a lifetime terrible catastrophe, and that we would make an impact for this disaster, but then we'd go back, to the other issues. And of course, since then, we immediately had a flood in the following spring. We've had record-breaking wildfires every year, and of course, COVID this year. So we're really looking at, what does community resilience look like always? Not just in disasters, but the impact we've chosen to make since the disasters is around 3 areas. One is helping individuals. So helping people with financial assistance, with food, with those basic human needs. And, many people say, disasters reveal who your community already is. So at the moment of a disaster, it's a kind of a bonding experience. You really feel connected, like we all went through this. That's when you get the kind of like #strong. And we're all in this together. But then pretty soon you see what is already in our communities, in our country, a tale of two. That people who had resources before the disastrous event, even though losing a home or the loss of a job is tragic for anyone, people with resources and connections do okay. People who were vulnerable before are even worse off. So we, in terms of our impact, we defined where we're giving to the most vulnerable communities, which too frequently are the communities of color, to older people and children. So financial assistance to those groups. Our other two areas are healing trauma, which continues to grow and grow as we have these multipliers of disasters. And the other is housing solutions. How can we create more affordable housing in our area? So those are some examples of how we've defined impact.
Okay, and so, literally since 2017, as you've just outlined, between the fire, the flood, and now COVID, it really, there's a great deal more need than perhaps capacity. Is that true? Or have you found that the people, the companies and employees feel the need to be even more generous, perhaps even at a time when they're more strapped than ever, or they have been impacted? What are you seeing there in terms of the giving?
We do see a real spike in giving at the time of disaster. And at the 2017 wildfires, we benefited, if you can call it that, in those weeks. This was the only national disaster. There had been hurricanes, but so the philanthropic support we got came from all over the country. And there was this sense of if it's not happening to our community right now, so we're going to kind of pay it forward. And that has been a pattern in our country, to give support to the communities where there wasn't a disaster, where there was a disaster, but wasn't one that you were experiencing. But what's happened as the disasters keep happening is some sense of disaster fatigue with philanthropy, that donors feel like they were making a one-time gift, but how can you have a one-time gift, a big one every year? COVID, though, has a little bit of a different nature to it, in terms of when we think about who's vulnerable. It's not just people who have been in poverty, communities of color, but it's organizations and businesses themselves. Vulnerable in terms of going out of business. So one interesting thing that we've seen, especially with corporate leaders and vintners, anyone who's a small business owner, who would generally see philanthropy as giving to nonprofit organizations, kind of giving externally into the community. There's been a sense in COVID, and I know this is going to be interactive, so I love to hear from experiences of people on this Zoom, from business owners of, my first responsibility to be generous is to take care of my employees and to pay them even if they can't work. And that, although it doesn't look like philanthropy, like in the way the IRS characterizes it, it is, that same instinct. So we have, at every kind of spike of disaster, including the beginning of COVID, seen an upsurge in generosity. But what's concerning is, how do we hold and have the capacity to keep giving in a crisis of a different kind of time horizon? Other types of disasters actually have what is kind of a predictable timeline. You have the disaster, you have immediate relief, you have midterm relief, and you have long-term relief. So it's this arc that goes, 3 to 5 years, but we really don't know about COVID.
Yeah. So one of the things that we were talking about is the different foundations in California and that just one family foundation can affect that community foundation by hundreds of millions of dollars. And that in Sonoma, so many people, a few on this call even, have certainly an attachment, an affinity, and even a home in Sonoma, but their primary residence is in a different county. So there's a great deal of wealth when everybody comes to their second home, to their vineyard, to their business. Do you still find that those people are still engaged with you because of having that second home, or do you feel usually they stay with their primary county?
We actually came to know many more second homeowners at the time of the 2017 fires. So I think that was a moment for people, even if they were, just coming up to Sonoma County occasionally, but had a second home there, where it was, we all went through this disaster and they were personally impacted as well. So really since then, I've seen a greater degree of engagement with second homeowners. Now, many people who have been philanthropic all their lives and have another primary resident, they may have a family foundation, or they may have a fund at the San Francisco foundation. So I think it's thinking of place a little bit differently. And I wouldn't expect someone with a primary residence somewhere else to move their philanthropy and only be in Sonoma County. But I think it's wonderful and appropriate when you consider your philanthropic portfolio, which is, I think, the best way to think about it. What do you want to include in your philanthropic portfolio in terms of issue areas as well as geography? And I think that's a dynamic that families face, not just, primary second homes, but as families expand and children live elsewhere, the definition of the place you love shifts a bit.
Right. To that end, we see the housing crisis, right, on top of everything else we've dealt with this year, but housing is consistent, that it comes up all the time, that we do not have enough housing. We need more housing for people. We need affordable housing. How much is your community foundation? I know that you've been certainly a part of other community foundations, and you're actually related to somebody who runs another foundation. How much of that, and because that's not just a California issue, that is a nationwide issue. How much is that focus? You mentioned that as one of the buckets, if you will, but how much are we building in and taking stock in housing from community foundations, and in what form does that play out in order to achieve the goal?
I think most community foundations in the Bay Area, when they survey or gather their stakeholders, be it nonprofits or community members, and say, what's your number one concern? Housing is always at or towards the very top of that list. And when we in 2017 overnight lost over 5,000 homes, that in Santa Rosa, that exacerbated that even further. But the issue of housing brings up kind of an interesting one around roles of philanthropy, because obviously you can't just solve the housing problems with charitable dollars. And we really we put aside $1 million to work on housing, which is a lot of money for us, to set aside. But $1 million, that would buy like 2 units of housing in Sonoma County. So I think an interesting question, and also this is like when you think about your personal philanthropic portfolio, be it your time or your money, what kind of strategies do you want to get involved in? So we, a few things we've been doing. One is through an organization called Share, where this is more like a roommate service, but it's matching people who need spaces in homes to people who want to rent out a room. Many times it's an older person who may be wealthy in equity, but not otherwise, that could use a roommate. So we've supported that program. We've also supported some work around ADUs, accessible dwelling units, accessory dwelling units, you might call them granny units, but looking for creative ways that there can be another unit on a property. So we've done some work, again, not in building them, but thinking like, well, what could we do that could be different? We helped fund a website and some materials for homeowners so that they could really see, well, what do models of these look like? I want to go on and do a calculator to see how long would it take me to break even, on this second unit. So we funded that. And then we incubated and funded a new organization really called Generation Housing, which is an advocacy, organization. So that's another way to kind of leverage funds. So those are some of the things that we've done around housing.
Wonderful. I also had spoken with a gentleman, we didn't talk about this earlier when you and Shelley and I were speaking, but who runs Hello Housing, which helps the administration of this for counties, and specifically mentioned Community Foundation of Sonoma County as being instrumental in moving that forward. So exciting. Each of us has time, talent, and treasure, of course, being our financial means, whatever they are. And of course, there are always ebbs and flows. What are the ways in which people can get involved with community foundations? And you had mentioned ways and questions for reflection that you would share with us so that each person can really put into context their role.
And I think this is, we were all finding ourselves having a different kind of Thanksgiving and a different kind of holiday. And I mean, and I think this is a time for deep reflection. And I love to do, year-end philanthropic planning, because it's just, like any kind of planning, with your philanthropy, you should have goals for your next year and do some reflection on where you've been. So I, first kind of questions to self, or for your Thanksgiving table, whether it's Zoom or you actually are with someone, I'd encourage you to reflect on the year, both of how you've given your time and if you've given money as well. So you can't know where you want to go if you don't kind of take stock of what's my baseline right here. So before kind of deciding on next year's portfolio, what did this year's look like? And you might have to reverse engineer it, because it may be that you had no intention of getting involved or giving in certain ways, and you ended up doing that. So even, if it's a pie chart of time and a pie chart of money in just a really rough way, what issues did you give to? And, what organizations? And then to step back from it, and some of this you will just have an emotional reaction from it. What feels authentic to you? Like, where does that feel like it was a really good value of either your time or your resource? When you think about the past year, giving either a gift of time or expertise or funds, what's the one gift of either time or money that you are most proud of, and why? I think these are great questions to share with one another as well. At our most recent My Team meeting, we had these two questions: what's the most meaningful gift you've ever given, and what's the most meaningful gift you've ever received? And I learned so much about colleagues I've been working with for years. And one interesting thing really was how much more lit up people were, even through Zoom, when they were speaking of what they were giving. But so I'd encourage you to first, okay, where am I on this giving journey? What did this year look like? And then think forward, and the end of the year is a good time to sometimes do hard things, like get off that board where you really don't feel like you're contributing. You feel an obligation to it, but it's not really speaking to you in the way that some other things are. So think about what changes you'd want to make. And when you look at next year's portfolio, where do you want your giving to go? And I'd encourage you on the first pass at it to think about a philanthropic portfolio in terms of issue area. So really think about what are the things in the community or nation, the issues that either you are so troubled by you want to change, and or inspired by that you want to be a part and really think about what those are, because I promise you, no matter what the issue is, there are nonprofits that go along with the issue. And I think sometimes it's more limiting to start with, okay, I know this organization and I know that organization. There are thousands and thousands of nonprofit organizations. So I just think it's a really good time. What was my portfolio this year, even if I never conceptualized it in that way? And what do I want next year's portfolio to look like? What are the issues? Who do I want my partners to be in this philanthropic journey? What support do I need? And what is the amount of time and money that I am planning on giving away? So it'd be interesting when you do your reflection to think if you even had an amount that you had planned, or you just kind of lived into it. I mean, this was such a, challenging, chaotic year. I wouldn't expect it to match, but that would be what I'd say as a starting point for reflection and planning.
Okay. As it regards your foundation specifically, are there talents that are needed and contribution of expertise needed at Community Foundation of Sonoma that you'd like to share with this group, who has in and of themselves, each of them, a pretty immense network?
Wow, well, that's an amazing offer. I can say that we're like in our board committees, we are always eager to have people that are CPAs to help, people get involved with the Community Foundation because they're really engaged in the community, or they're generous, or they know the issues. And sometimes what we need, and this is not, I don't just speak for the Community Foundation, this is a lot of nonprofit organizations, we really need that deep expertise, that people that can help us with our finances, with our audit, with that kind of thing. So honestly, if you live in Sonoma County, people that would like to be on an audit committee. That's not a very sexy committee, but that's the kind of thing that where we on that. That's my honest answer, but in terms of involvement with the Community Foundation, if you are looking for a partner in your philanthropy and you have never explored a donor advised fund, I'd be delighted to talk to you about that, just to have a conversation about what that would look like for you and your family. I'm also always happy to talk to someone, it kind of a follow-up to this pie chart exercise I've told you, whether we have an ongoing partnership with you or not. It's part of our job as being philanthropic advisors and encouraging generosity. Where we are also actively fundraising is our Sonoma County Resilience Fund. So we are now realizing we are in the resilience business for long-term recovery. We define long-term by 5 years from each disaster. So we thought it was going to be 5 years from 2017. Now it's just going further and further out. The further out in time you go away from a disaster, it gets off people's radar, and it's harder to seek funds for it. But we are positioning ourselves to keep coming back and educating the community. This is what the lives are like currently for people who went through the 2017 fires. This is what's going on with people that are getting COVID. Sadly, in Sonoma County and in many places around the country, it is so disproportionate. Communities of color. I think it's something like 75% of the COVID cases in Sonoma County have been in the Latinx community. Why, that ties into kind of the racial justice movement that's going on right now. So these are the kind of issues that at the Community Foundation, we're not just taking them one at a time. We see the intersection of them, of the issues, and among the organizations addressing them, and can help make the best decisions around the grants for these funds. So, and the best answer, I think, to your question, Michaela, is anyone on this call, I would be happy, and whether you live in Sonoma County or not, to have kind of a follow-up one-on-one conversation with you about your own philanthropy.
Wonderful. Shelley, would you like to go to the community and ask the questions that are popping up?
I'd be happy to. And Beth, I've actually put the general contact information for the Community Foundation. Are you comfortable with my putting your email in there, or is there a better
Oh,
contact?
sure. You're welcome to put my email. Yeah,
We'll do that.
I think you have it, ebrown@sonomacf.org.
Okay. Well, we have a couple of really lovely comments. One is from our friend Drew. And Drew, I know you're not shy, so why don't you unmute yourself and actually tell us what you got to say.
All right. So wonderful, because this is great, and I truly appreciate what you do. Volunteering has been a huge part of my life, and I've volunteered for years with World Central Kitchen on the fires, and also with a local food bank. But it seems like with groups like World Central Kitchen, and God love them, they're everywhere. But the next disaster comes and they kind of go away. And housing is always important, but feeding people, I'm trying to find groups out there, and especially during COVID, it's tough to get food to people. I'm with my business. I'm going to get started what I call bread for the people. I'm going to start using some of my bread to actually feed people, seniors and the hungry. But what are you seeing out there? I mean, with groups feeding people, and I mean, you mentioned the Latin community. I see a lot with farm workers. Again, sometimes during COVID, it's a big flashpoint. Hey, we got to take care of the farm worker supply chain, but then it kind of goes away. I just wondered what you might be seeing out there, that maybe groups that are real consistent on feeding people.
Yeah, food insecurity is a huge, huge issue. And the face of that has really changed. And I'm sure, it's the same in Placer County, where you had people who went almost overnight from being food bank volunteers to being food bank clients. And we in Sonoma County, we have a large, the Redwood Empire Food Bank is kind of our rock in terms of food bank, but there's so many other efforts that have popped up, as a result of the disasters. So I think this started after the 2017 fires, but kind of went away, but then came back with COVID around food coordination. So a food task force that is all the organizations, the big ones like the food bank, and then the other volunteer efforts popping up to coordinate it, because there's some, very well-intentioned efforts that the food doesn't get to the right people, or it's, some of it spoils, or, people are concerned about ICE raids. So you have to go to places where there's a trusted nonprofit partner who is in the community. So it's more, I think you've probably experienced some of the complexities of it. And that's one thing that I do think has made a difference in terms of making sure all of the efforts, and acknowledging that, there's no effort that's too small if it's popping up and things like this. Like, let's not ignore that effort. Let's see what all is in there and try to coordinate.
Okay, and then we have a wonderful comment from our friend Carly Fain. And Carly, if you want, I will ask it for you, or I'll give you a second. And if you decide to unmute and ask it on your own, that's fine too. Carly's podcast, Messy and Magnificent. Michaela is the guest, and it dropped today, just as an aside. So we'll talk about that separately. But Carly's comment is that I really appreciate the list of questions you've outlined, Elizabeth. Pausing to be thoughtful in this way is so helpful in planning philanthropy in alignment with my values. Thank you for these great prompts to write into.
I'll just add to that, Elizabeth. I see how those prompts are relevant in terms of philanthropy, and also in so many areas. And what a great time of year to extend this invitation to us to pause and be a little bit thoughtful about what we're doing. I appreciate how that could really magnify the impact of what we're able to do. Thank you for that.
Well, thanks for that feedback. And I mean, it's really, for me personally and my organization, one thing that I've really pushed us and me to do is get beyond identifying values and talking about them. I mean, that's something we all do. And I think it's important. Of course, that's the first thing to do, to identify and talk about values. But I think living your values is in your behaviors. And the choice you make about your time and your money really shows where your values are. So I think it's an interesting, inventory to make, and I think you're right on kind of all aspects of life. Like I can keep saying health is my number one priority, but if I don't actually do it, if I don't actually do the class or eat the kale, then it's not the same.
Carly's characteristically lovely comment is a perfect segue into resilience, which is something that she and Michaela had talked about. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the Resilience Fund.
Sure. So our Resilience Fund is our fund that we started after the 2017 wildfires for long-term disaster recovery, but now it encompasses really everything that requires resilience in a community, which is the confluence of all the crises that we have, be it a natural climate change disaster, be it a public health disaster, or an economic disaster, a racial justice disaster. All of these things require community resilience. So that's what our work is towards. We've so far granted out about $12 million from that fund.
And just one more, Taylor Abrams, who has been valiantly trying to join this conversation and was almost thwarted, but just like her mother, never gives up, and she has arrived and has a question. Taylor?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry. Yes, I did. I joined late because my dang computer would not work. But I was just wondering, I'm 22 and I am really interested in giving back, and I always have been. I've loved volunteering. Where can I get started, really?
Mm-hmm. Well, Taylor, I mean, I would say, and I think all of us who are older than 22 probably share the notion that when we think like it can be a hard time to be hopeful right now, but whenever I talk or meet with someone your age, it gives me hope. So, thank you for what you and your generation is doing, already in terms of kind of stepping forward and help leading us. And for your own, giving and volunteering, I'd say the exercise is no different in terms of thinking about like this idea of what's your portfolio of how you want to give in the next year, be it, a time or resource. So, I think given that you've been volunteering already, if you're thinking, what else, that makes me think that there's something kind of not complete in the experience you're having. Like, does that mean you want to volunteer for a different kind of organization, but the same issue? It could be, I'll just take, since we were talking about food, you could approach food insecurity by being a, volunteer cook or distributor at a food bank. You could be on the board and be like a policymaker. You can decide that you want to really be involved in systems change, and you want to be involved in an advocacy organization related to food. So it's hard to say, without knowing more about what you're interested in, Taylor. But I'd start with some reflection of what have you found meaningful about your experiences so far? What issues would you like to become involved in? And from there, I do feel like, I don't know if you're here, in Sonoma County or Northern California, while community foundations are generally looking at, for to work with people who are going to make significant, charitable contributions. We'll always be happy to have a conversation with anyone, and a young person about here, you're interested in this. We really know the community. Maybe you want to check out these 3 organizations.
Excellent. We have a question about your grant process from Chanda. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So we do grants in 2 ways. One by initiative, and the other one is competitive grant programs. So our larger investments, like I just was talking about earlier, around healing community trauma and housing solutions and financial support helping individuals, we are generally in those larger grants looking for some partnerships to have over time. So we're forming partnerships with organizations that we kind of already know in the community. And we're not putting that out like a request for proposal, because we've already kind of narrowed it down based on our past work and knowing these organizations. So we call those by initiative, which means we actually approach the organization, or we approach maybe 3 organizations and find who's the right fit. All of our competitive grant programs, we you can find those through our website. And we, for our community grants, have a committee of board members and community members who looks at the grants and along with our team, and then makes decisions, which are hard decisions. People always think like, wow, it must be so great being in a business where you're always giving money away. It's a business where more often than not you're saying no. But that's how we do our competitive grants programs.
And then I would love to, as we near our end of time, 2 things. One, what, as you put together your forecast, and obviously 5 years ago, the Resilience Fund probably was a discussion around the table, but not one of immediate need that it became by 17 and then in each successive disaster. When you start planning now, so many companies, because of COVID and racial injustice, et cetera, are revisiting all of their strategies about this. What can you share with us, maybe the top 3 things that you're going to look at that perhaps have not been a part of the foundation's priority as of this year?
Sure, and these things have been kind of a part of our work, but not, as large. When I look at the coming years, one is around preparedness, which we had thought more narrowly around preparedness for wildfires, which we still need to do. But if this year has taught us anything, it's like you have to be very humble when you think of your ability to plan. But thinking about preparedness as kind of any disaster. And it can be any of these levers. I would have never 3 years ago put like democracy on a potential list, of things to be preparing for a challenge around. So looking at community preparedness, so the intersection of the sectors and organizations, and then also in individual organizations. So nonprofits are our most important partners. Are they prepared for disasters? Related in a way is just the health and the capacity of the nonprofit sector. If our nonprofits are going out of business or do not have the infrastructure they need, then philanthropy is really needs to find a way to implement our investments. So one thing that we really encourage everyone to do is to continue to give to organizations that you've always given to, even if you kind of shift gears during a disaster, because we're really concerned just about the health and the business models of nonprofits. And then another thing that will continue to be a through line in our work is around equity and giving voice and giving more resource to people through no fault of their own have been discriminated against and are living in a really unjust set of circumstances. And I think the racial justice movement may give that work some greater momentum.
Excellent. Shelley, back to the communities there. And you're on mute right now.
I'm muted with all kinds of wonderful noise in the background. I'm sorry. We have a lot of encouragement for Taylor to find something local, and there's a lot of love for Taylor in the chat, appropriately enough.
Excellent. All right. And so if we do not have any other questions, what I'd like to ask you, Beth, in the last couple minutes here is, what if there was one thing you could wish for at Thanksgiving for each of us to do, other than our pie charts and our planning? I've written that down already. Plan to make that an activity, the holiday. What would it be? If you were you're speaking to a lot of people that have, as we've said, significant networks. what would you like us to do and to know?
I think, we're at a time that's so overwhelming. And that sometimes it can be hard to be optimistic and to be hopeful. And like I began with this poem around grief, we are in a time, I don't think we're even aware yet of how much we are and going to be collectively grieving. That, sometimes not just in philanthropy, but in life, that kind of circumstance can be almost paralyzing. And I think what I want to say, and what I see over and over again, is your acts, both tiny and tremendous, done with generosity, make a huge difference. So, I mean, generosity, I feel like it is a way of life, and it doesn't have to be around money, and that each day there are opportunities that we are given, and sometimes they are quite hard. Sometimes the hardest ones actually are with the people we're closest to. What would generosity look like in this moment? So if we could start to live that question, we don't have to have the answer to it. But if we could start to live the question, what does generosity look like in this moment? I think it would change our lives, and it would change the world.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you to close with the poem, please.
You want me to read it again?
Yes.
Okay. The Thing Is by Ellen Bass. To love life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat, thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weights you down like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief. You think, how can a body withstand this? Then you hold life like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes, and you say, yes, I will take you, I will love you again.
It's so good. And I wanted you to do that because there were a few people who came later, and it's amazing. It's really amazing. So thank you. Thank you so much on behalf of Shelley and me for joining us tonight and our whole community. It's a great way to have done that to begin our Thanksgiving week, Beth. And we wish you a very happy Thanksgiving.
It's wonderful to meet you all in these little squares, and I hope at least some of you have a chance to meet in person. But thank you for inviting me and for doing this forum and for forming this community. I'd love to come back and just listen in to some of your future speakers, if that's okay.
More than okay. You and anybody else we love having our, what we call our passionate, our ambassadors, our regulars like Drew and Liz and Shonda and Anna and Linda and others. We love it. That's how the community grows and shares the joy of myriad voices. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Everybody. Have a wonderful, happy
Thanksgiving.
safe, healthy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye, everyone.